Live from Atlanta, I'm Lynda Kinkade. You've just been listening to President Donald Trump speaking at the White House there, where he announced the federal takeover of the police department, as well as the deployment of the National Guard to Washington, D.C. He called this Liberation Day, saying the cleanup efforts will begin in D.C. and then expand to other cities. He also spoke about his upcoming summit with Vladimir Putin of Russia, ruling out that the Ukrainian president will not be there. I want to welcome our Stephen Collinson, who was listening to that press briefing, as well as our Clare Sebastian, who's in London. Stephen, first to you. The president claims that D.C. is overrun with crime, which is the opposite to what we've seen from press releases from the U.S. Attorney's Office earlier this year, which said that crime is at a 30-year low in the capital. Explain these emergency powers that the president is using.
Yeah, I think everybody that lives in Washington, D.C. would like to see less crime, but you're right that the crime levels of homicides, carjackings, other violent crime has been falling. So what is happening here is that the president is doing what he did on a number of other issues, including tariffs. He's declaring a state of emergency in order to unlock new presidential powers. And he has the special capacity to do this because Washington, D.C. is a federal district and not a state. And I think we need to look at the political backdrop of this. I think the idea of police on the street, more police on the streets, more federal agents, and even reservist soldiers in the National Guard on the streets of Washington, D.C. is going to be seen as very tough action. It's going to please elements of Donald Trump's base. And that, I think, is what the politics is all about. For people that don't support Trump, I think it will be seen as yet again another sign of authoritarian creeping here. The president has clearly been itching to put troops on the streets of democratic cities, especially democratic cities, for a long time. You recall he sent federal troops to Los Angeles during some unrest there. So I think there are very troubling overtones. And I think that is what's going to dominate this. This is all about President Trump using power and looking tough. And it's very much a political ploy as well as a law enforcement play, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And he's looking to expand that. I do want to go to Clare Sebastian because the president also spoke about his summit, which is set to take place with the Russian president this Friday in Alaska. He said the Ukrainian president would not get an invite to that meeting. How is Europe responding right now, especially with the talk of a coalition of the willing to guarantee Ukraine's security in any sort of ceasefire?
Yeah, Lynda, I think that was more or less the biggest headline out of what President Trump had to say. It was a little vague in parts, but he seemed pretty clear that, in his words, Zelensky wasn't part of this meeting, but he would be calling him, he said, out of respect right after it, alongside European leaders. And he did say that he was going to be telling Putin to end the war, although we, of course, don't know how he's going to persuade him to do that. Russia has given no sign that it wants to step back from its maximalist goals in this war. So meanwhile, over here in Europe, we have this frenzy of diplomatic activity. We have a virtual EU foreign ministers meeting that we understand is still ongoing right now, about 2 hours in. We've also heard that the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, is convening a virtual meeting on Wednesday that will involve European leaders and also President Trump to discuss this summit in Alaska. So they really are here in Europe trying to control the narrative, trying to reinforce the point that Ukraine should get a seat at the table, that a ceasefire should be in place for real peace talks to happen, and that no territory should be handed over that was taken by force. Now, that very much contrasts to what we heard from President Trump in these comments, that he said that territory essentially would be up for discussion. He said, look, Russia's occupied a big portion of Ukraine. They were going to try and get some of what they've occupied back, he said, but of course Ukraine cannot accept the loss of any of its territory permanently to Russia.
All right, Clare Sebastian for us in London. Stephen Collinson in D.C. Great to have you both with us. My colleague Biana Golodriga has more on this breaking story next. I'm Lynda Kinkade. You're watching CNN.